Welcome all to tonight's informational reading from New York State Literary event presenters. I am Ricardo Hernandez, the Assistant Director of Programs and Partnerships at Poets and Writers. Hosting tonight's event is my colleague, Jalen Lisbon, the Program Assistant. So what we're going to be doing tonight is a little bit of an informational session on our Readings and Workshops mini grants program. I have a slide deck for you all. It won't take us too much time. After our presentation, we will be opening up for a Q&A where you will all have a chance to ask questions about our program, guidelines, eligibility, stuff like that. Jalen will be moderating that portion of the evening. And once we get through the Q&A, we will be closing out tonight's session with just a quick recap on some of the stuff that we covered, as well as other Poets and Writers resources. So just a friendly reminder that tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be made available for through Poets and Writers YouTube channel. You're of course welcome to leave your camera and microphone off during the presentation, but we do encourage folks to engage and come on camera during the Q&A. It's always nice to hear and see folks as they're asking questions, and sometimes that element of engagement really helps folks express their ideas, so we encourage it. One more reminder, so there is closed captioning available for tonight's meeting. To turn this on, you would click on the Show Captions option at the bottom of the Zoom window toolbar. If your window is minimized, or just a little smaller or something, you may need to expand it, or look for the More button in the toolbar. It'll be 3 little dots, and then there you'll see the Show Captions option. So on to the focus of tonight's evening. I will be sharing my screen. We have prepared an excellent presentation for you all. Excellent, in my opinion. And so one caveat here, I'm not able to see you all while I'm doing the presentation. So if you do have questions or need help, feel free to write it in the chat, and Jalen will do his best to answer questions and render technical assistance. But we're going to start. Okay. Jalen, do I have my slide showing all right?
Yep, it looks good.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So to get us started, the Readings and Workshops mini grants program. Each year, the Readings and Workshops program provides support to hundreds of writers participating in literary readings and conducting writing workshops in California, New York, and the cities of Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, Houston, Seattle, New Orleans, Tucson, and Washington, D.C. Some of the basics here. So we provide grants for readings. These range between $150 to $450 per session. Grants for workshops may range between $200 to $300 per session. In New York, organizations may request up to $3,000 in grants during the course of a fiscal year. So a little bit of a bit more about the organizational cap. It's flexible, so that $3,000 that an organization in New York can request on behalf of other writers whom are giving readings or workshops, they can request up to $3,000. If they hit the $3,000, it's not a hard decline. A lot of times this is flexible and dependent on the event type, the number of applications we're reviewing or considering at a moment, and also, of course, what funds are available at the time that we review something. Let me just admit someone here. Okay. Now, the big sort of thing to remember here, and it's going to be a valuable resource for you all, is our program's guideline page. To do that, to find it, you would go to pw.org/funding. When you type that into your browser bar, you will be automatically directed to our program page. For a bit of a more analog approach, you of course can visit us at pw.org. If you go to our very beautiful blue header where it says programs and partnerships, you will see a drop-down option, and it will of course be readings and workshops. It has, again, this recap of what the program is. Now, in terms of when to apply, event coordinators or literary event presenters, they apply online 6 weeks in advance of the reading or the workshop that they're requesting funding for. And they would go to our grant system page, which is pw.smartsimple.com. I will show you all now what that page looks like. Again, we have a beautiful blue. You will have the option to log into our grant system if you have an existing account. If this is the first time that a literary event organizer is applying to us, they would go to the option on the right, which is to register. There is also this link here that links back to our guidelines and our other resources for the program. Now, when you are an event presenter and you've registered, what you are expected to fill out is a tabulated online application. This is what it looks like. This is just a little sampling of it. Basically, it's a lot of checks, a lot of drop-down menus, and a lot of short answers. Now, a little bit more about what we fund and what we don't fund. So we do fund both in-person and virtual events. We also do fund hybrid events. So that is an event that has an in-person component as well as a live streaming. It's actually been a little more common that we're funding those. In terms of the request that an organizer is making to our mini grants program, a match is encouraged. So that is to say, whatever grant request is being made of us, let's say it's a $200 request for a reading, if the applying organization can also match that to provide them with that writer with an additional $200, that is fantastic. We of course cheer it, and we're very happy whenever we see that come in, but it's not required. We've had a couple of emails and calls from folks who have asked and wondered, oh, I've wanted to apply, but I'm not able to put money towards this writer. So we wanted to include that clarification point. Another big clarification point here is that nonprofit status, or what's also known as 501(c) status, is not needed to apply. So really think of when we say literary event presenters and organizations, I think a lot of times folks draw the assumption that we're talking about other nonprofits or more formalized entities in their community, but it's really much more broad than that. We accept applications from organizations, from groups of writers, from venues, reading series. As it's stated here in the slide, applicants are very diverse. From bookstores to libraries to barbershops. One of the first organizations that I remembered really sort of explained to me and made me understand what was possible was I knew of a reading series that was being hosted out of a laundromat, which was really fantastic. Poetry and writing can exist anywhere. So we'll move on to my next slide. A little more additional info. We've talked a little bit about clarification points, so just more context here. We do prioritize applications for events that reach underserved or historically marginalized groups and to organizations that feature a diverse range of writers. We fund a wide range of writers, emerging to established, but we do have an eligibility component for the writers when applications are being submitted. So we do ask that writers have at least one publication credit or spoken word performance credit to qualify for funding. Next, writers can initiate the process for the program by sharing information about our program with the event coordinator or the literary event presenter and encouraging them to apply. However, we just wanted to sort of restate that writers can't apply for themselves. So if you're a writer, you can definitely bring our program to the attention of your contact at the venue or organization where you're reading or facilitating a workshop, but you just can't submit the application for yourself. So From a very sort of specific point, I'm just going to telescope us back out to a little bit more about the program as a whole. So this is a summary of our activity in fiscal year 22, I believe. So this includes information of our program as a whole. As I mentioned at the beginning, we fund events here in New York, in California, and 8 other cities. This is our activity combined. This is just to give you sort of again, a broad view of what the program has been able to accomplish. So writers who received our mini grants last year, it was 760 writers. We distributed $254,000 among those writers. About 50 identified as BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, or person of color. The literary events that these writers presented with our support is above 1,500 in total. About 96,000 audience members online, in person, or in combination of the above were served through those events. We hosted about 10 literary gatherings. Many of them were online, and also a lot of them were out through California. But this is among one of our very first that we're doing for New York. So we can now, I guess, tally that up to a new one and start taking count. And then the writers and literary presenters who attended these gatherings, it was about 250 last year. We're hoping that that will be larger this year. So now that I've given you a bit of an overview of the program, what I'm going to do is direct you to a couple of resources. I'm highlighting these because they are fairly new, and not a lot of folks are aware of them. So we want to make sure that there's a little bit more awareness for them, and because we also think that they're actually very helpful. So the first is the applicant toolkit. It's a 3-page PDF that I say this to folks, it really is an overview of the process and also the parts that you'll need to apply if you're an event coordinator or literary event presenter. The grantee toolkit is, let's say you've already done the heavy work, you've applied, I want Jalen to come read for me at my poetry series, I've done the work and submitted the application, but now what do I do? What the grantee toolkit basically fills in that blank. It's what to expect once you have gotten the award, the approval for the mini grant, and how to best leverage the support. And then finally, we've put together a template for writers. Again, writers unfortunately can't submit applications for themselves, but because we encourage writers to reach out to coordinators and really connect us with their contacts, we've put together a template for an email to know how to speak about the program, to know what links to direct folks to, and really just to make a better case for how and why an organizer should apply for a reading or a workshop grant for you. So now that I've talked a little bit, I'm going to tag in a virtual version of myself for a very interesting and fun, in my opinion, portion, which is an application demo. It's just a 5-minute clip where I will share with you what the application looks like. Now, this resource is actually available on our Poets and Writers YouTube channel. So it is available for playback, much like this meeting will be. And I'm just going to share this while I take a drink of water and mute myself. But Jalen, does this look okay? Are you able to see the clip? Okay.
Yep.
Great. So I'm going to play that for you all now.
We can't hear the clip though, Ricardo.
Thanks, Jalen.
No problem.
Let's go back. Let me try this again. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to try my share again. going to share sound and optimize for video clip. I'm ready to apply for the Whirlwind reading series. I would have to register my organization first, and that's going to be on this right-hand side. But once I've done that and I've received my password to log in and I've set up my account, what I'd have to do is just enter my username of the email that I registered with, my password. I click log in. This is our main sort of dashboard for you as a sponsor. You have the ability to create applications, see applications you're currently working on, or even past applications you already submitted, as well as reports. So let's say in this instance, I'm going to create a new application. One of the first things, and this is just like there's no guidance in that first moment. And it's one of the things that we're actually working on is making sure that when people get here, they can sort of very easily navigate to the different sections of it. But something you do have to do is just click to save your draft, kind of stamps it and makes the application real. And then it's a tabulated form. So you would move left to right. So the first tab is just your profile. That is the organization's profile, your contact information. The next tab over to the right is the event tab. Anything that has a red asterisk is required. And so you'll actually also, if you could refer back to the PDF of the toolkit for applicants, a lot of this information, this is where you would input it. Whether it's a poetry, fiction, or creative nonfiction event, whether it's a reading or a workshop, like Jamie mentioned, we have included a question as to what kind of event format you're hosting. If it's in person, if it's virtual, if it is a virtual event, we just ask for an event URL. So sometimes people will share their Zoom login, the link to join on Zoom or an Eventbrite page, so on and so forth. The next tab over is the site tab. So this just lets us know not the website of your event, but the actual venue that it will be held. The dates tab records the number of sessions that you'll be applying for. So that's where those grant ranges come in. If you're doing a reading, you would enter the session in this page. Likewise, if you're going to be doing a reading and a workshop, you just want to make sure that both of those sessions are recorded in this page. The next tab over is the writer's information. So like Jamie mentioned, we ask that you submit separate applications for each writer. Sometimes it's helpful to think about this as a check request form. So what you would enter here is the information of the writer that you're applying for. At the bottom, you will see that there is a place to provide a short bio, and that's just a quick eligibility check. We just need a publication and or performance credits in the genre that the writer will be presenting in. So for instance, if I'm a poet, if I'm bringing in a poet for my reading series, I would just include Jamie has been published in this anthology or has featured at this stage. And then last but definitely not least is the request tab. So this is where you just let us know how much you're requesting on behalf of this writer. Below that is the amount that the sponsor will provide, if any. We don't require it anymore, but we definitely encourage it. And then finally, the authorized tab, where we just ask for a signature from the organization contact. And that's it. It's a tabulated form. Just want to go back to the original feedback we got from Andrea, where we're working on the application. It is definitely not intuitive, but we're finally making headway. And so I imagine that we'll be seeing changes in the near future. But we're seeing changes in the near future. Let me come back here. I was in the middle of answering someone's question. I'll just answer it here now a little bit, just as a sampling and a taste of the Q&A. Forgive the low video quality. It is a little harder to read, partially because I'm sharing the recording via Zoom, but the clip itself can be expanded and watched again through our YouTube channel. We'll make sure to include a link to this specific clip so that you all can expand it and sort of take a look at the application components, and it's easier to read. Okay, so we are nearly at the end of the presentation here. We'll be moving to the Q&A part. But I did just sort of want to talk a little bit more about, let me see, the why. Oh, wait. And I do think that that's important. So I want to make sure that I share that with you all. So again, thank you for your patience as I'm figuring this out. Here we go. But the why. So again, we've talked about the when, the where, a little bit about the how. So that was the application, but the why. Why this program, why it matters. And sometimes, much like in real life, when we don't have the words for it, we turn to writers. And in this case, I turned to a writer who was actually also a former Poets and Writers staffer, and was my predecessor, and has since continued on and continues to form community and provide readings and workshops. And when we reached out to this writer through a writing report, so if you're a grantee and you've received support from us in the past, you've probably gotten an email saying, please complete your report. Those reports reach us, and we do read them carefully. And it really does speak to the why. So why this program is vital, vital, vital. To be able to create a 2-hour lesson plan and present it in a community setting. So that is no gatekeeping, no bars for entry, just the will to learn is radical these days. This type of funding program must be sustained for the sake of writing communities and for the agency, the power this gives to writing communities. Again, I turn to this quote because it is a reminder that for all the components of the application, it matters. There's an impact in the world, and it's important to support writers for their contributions, of course, to the larger discourse, but also our internal lives. And I feel like this is a great way of just encapsulating the importance of the program. So I'm going to stop my screen share there. I'm going to take another sip of water. And Jalen, I'm going to invite you to lead us during the Q&A. Much like Jalen just typed in the chat, just a reminder here, we're going to ask folks to use the raise hand button during this part. The reason being that it does help us just keep track of who raised their hand during what point. So you kind of have to be sort of quick on it. If you haven't used the Q&A button or you're not able to see it, you are, of course, welcome to use the raise hand button. It's in the reactions part. And if you do end up typing your question in the Q&A or chat, either Jalen or myself will read it aloud to the group so that everyone can hear it and we're able to answer stuff. But Jalen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ricardo. So yeah, we'll just get into the Q&A session. Thanks for your presentation. Raphael, we'll start with you. And Angela, you're on deck.
Hello, good evening. My question is, let's say you are an event sponsor, but you're also a writer. Should I have a colleague sponsor me in my for the event, fill out an application to sponsor me?
That's a great question. And I think Ricardo will be able to speak a bit more to it. But yes, that's the short answer. The short answer is yes, we can't fund a writer if they are applying for themselves. We do need someone else to apply on their behalf.
That's right. Yes. It's what we call sort of the two-hat dilemma, for lack of a better word. But we understand, many people serve. They're not only writers themselves, but they're also community advocates and leaders, and they serve roles in other organizations and other capacities. So yes, just because you're serving as an organization contact for one doesn't, it doesn't exclude you from receiving funds. But again, in that case, the organization that, your colleague would have to create a profile, would have to submit an application for review, and if approved, would likewise have to go through the reporting aspects, all the other good stuff about the event. But I believe, I hope that answers your question, Raphael. Excellent.
Great. Next up is Anjali or Anjali. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but it's great to see you tonight.
Good evening. Thank you. I would like to share this quick anecdote before I ask my question, because it also says the why. I got a text from someone the other day who had done the facilitating, I guess, at the beginning of COVID when the workshops went virtual, and we had not met, but she got thrown into this role for the organization, which was 3 years ago now, right? She wrote, I feel like for the rest of, and she wasn't a writer, I feel like for the rest of my life, I'll read poems and remember that you taught me to love them.
Wow.
Yeah, yes. So, but that leads into my question, which is about community building, literary gatherings. Would an event that might really be about community building in the community, to invite people to, not an open mic, but really to talk about writing and the power of writing, is that possible?
Ricardo, what do you think about this question?
Yeah, I mean, I would say anything is possible. I feel like, for instance, if part of that community building event involves, yourself or whoever the writer will be engaging, where they'll be sharing their work, giving a reading of that work, or likewise leading folks or attendees through a creative writing workshop. If that is part of the event, that's definitely something we would consider funding, because again, reading or a workshop is happening. If it's just a talk or a straight, just a community building event where there won't be a reading or a creative writing workshop, that probably wouldn't fall within our guidelines. But again, it's mainly because we're focusing on that component. Is the writer giving a reading? Are they giving a workshop? Anjali, I know that in the past you facilitated workshops for teens here in New York. I'd love to have a chance to maybe talk with you a little bit more offline, what you're thinking about in terms of a community building event, to see whether it would be a good fit. But thank you for the question. And again, like I said, anything is possible, so long as there's a reading or a workshop happening. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you all so much for your raised hands. Before we move on to the next raised hand, there's a question in the chat that came in a few moments ago from Lisa. Lisa's asking, if you set up an organizational profile, will the form autofill, or do you need to enter the profile information every time you apply? Ricardo, I think you know this better than I.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. So it's a little complex. It veers into technical assistance. Some of you might know, a lot of browsers now, they just have autofills. So they will recognize, for instance, a website that you visited before, and it'll start filling stuff out. That may happen if you've applied in the past and you're coming back to the system. If your browser has that setting, it will happen. But I think the question that Lisa's getting at is basically, if I'm applying for multiple writers or I'm filling out an application, do I have to fill out the information each time? The answer is yes. Unfortunately, the way the system is set up right now, it does require that someone enter the information each time. Lisa, if you're planning on applying for a couple of writers, maybe a lot of writers for a singular event, We are able to offer technical assistance to make it a little easier in terms of administrative work. But, again, it does require that individual applications for each writer be submitted, and it does take a little bit of admin work. But we're happy to try to make that a little easier. Again, reach out to us. We're here to help through the application process.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Next up is Tanika Steele, and Aaron Toney is on deck afterwards.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Just a quick question, like if you were planning on doing maybe like a literacy program over the course of a summer for a community, would that be something that would be considered where maybe they were doing like different genres of literacy, whether it be with adults, children, teens, but try to incorporate everyone in that community over the course of maybe like a summer program, like, like July and August when the kids are home? Would that be something that would be considered for funding?
Mhm. Well, to begin with, we do often fund workshop series that take place over a summer or over a long period of time, where there might be a workshop every few weeks or so, often like that. I think we have some limitations regarding the ages and the demographics that we're able to serve, specifically regarding younger children, which Ricardo can speak more to, I think. But yeah, as Ricardo mentioned earlier, in response to another question, as long as there is a writer who might be reading, or if this is a literacy-based workshop in a sense, I think that's definitely something we would consider funding. Ricardo?
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. I think we need to hear a little bit more about what the literacy component, what that entails, and definitely a little bit more about the writers or the audience that you're hoping to serve. I realize that this wasn't included in the presentation, but it is on our other full-length guidelines and other materials. So we don't fund events for children, which typically is 12 and under for us. However, we do fund events that serve an intergenerational audience. So let's say it's an event for families, not just adults, but also for kids or for teens. That would be fine. But if it's a workshop or a reading that primarily serves children, that wouldn't be eligible for funds. Again, I would say, Tanika, if we'd like to have a conversation with us and then brainstorm, that might be the easiest way of us just figuring out whether you should submit an application. And then just also just like Jalen said, we do review applications year round. It's about every 2 weeks. It's always open, the application cycle. So let's say you're planning something for July. Actually, this would be a great time to start applying or at least considering submitting the application. So I'm glad you joined us tonight, Tanika.
Thank you. I was just about to ask when would be a good time for me. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Tanika. I also just dropped in the chat our just another link to our website, which might have a more just, when you're talking, things can be difficult to remember, but the website has basically everything that we're saying here as well.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Next up is Aaron Toney, and No Land is on deck afterwards.
Yeah, my question is, if there's a nonprofit organization, do they necessarily have to have a venue? And if they don't, what are the stipulations for that?
Thank you. Ricardo, I think you can take this question.
Sure. Well, really the best practice here is to submit an application once the details have been finalized to the best of the ability of the organization sponsoring. So let's say there is a venue already decided and an application is submitted and we approve it, but something happens and that venue is no longer available. We are able to then, the organization and the writer reach out to us and they let us know, hey, we can't do it in there anymore. Can we do it in this venue? We need to update the application. But I wouldn't encourage submitting an application with those details not finalized.
Right.
I would say that because we've been able to fund both virtual and in-person events, most of the time, I think people have opted for virtual events whenever a venue isn't available. It's very rare that we get an application that we approved where it's a TBD. In those instances, we do sort of ask folks to get those details finalized before. I hope that does that answer your question?
Oh, yes. It totally answers my question. From you guys saying that you only, if you work with children, they have to be 12 and above versus 12 and under.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
13 and up is so teenage. Yep.
Right. Exactly. And is it restricted from schools? Is it prohibited with schools?
Oh, great question. So this is a finer sort of thing. So we do fund workshops. For instance, if there's a high school that's interested in hosting a workshop, that's totally fine and eligible. The real sort of detail, there's two of them. One, we do not fund paid employees of the organization that's applying or board members.
Gotcha.
If a workshop is happening in a high school, it's totally fine. It just can't happen during school hours. So it has to be extracurricular.
So it'd have to be after school versus during school.
After school, during a summer session, basically as long as it's an extracurricular, that's okay. Most of the time we will sort of, we might follow up with folks who are doing activities in schools just to clarify that. But yeah, that's totally fine. Applications for events in schools are fine, so long as it's not paid employees or board members and the event isn't happening during school hours. I guess one more distinction, this isn't a bonus now. We're not able to fund events in SUNYs, so State University of New York, those universities. This is I think the term is a grandfather clause. So as long as I've been here, that's been the explanation given to me.
What about California? Because I'm in California.
California, good to see you. Yeah, California, it's a lot of the same, but of course there's no SUNYs in California.
Right.
But I don't recall that there is a restriction with universities. But you know what? Maybe this would be a great question for the director in the West, because she might be able to better speak to it.
You're talking about Jamie?
Jamie, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I believe, again, as far as like when and where workshops can happen in schools, those restrictions apply. I'm not sure if there's a university system that's excluded, but it's a good question for Jamie. And thank you for joining us from California.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Aaron. No Land, you are up next if you would like to share your question, and Jasmine, you're on deck.
Everyone for doing this today. I apologize if this was already asked, but I'm considering doing an event with a fellow curator who has a nonprofit in May, and I was just wondering at this point in your fiscal year if that's a used up time or if it's too soon. Is that still on deck, maybe?
Yeah, Ricardo, I think you can speak to this, but I think that I'm fairly certain that now would be a great time to apply. As Ricardo said, we're always reviewing grants, really, and the earlier is the better. So yeah, I definitely think that would be possible.
Okay.
Yeah, if the event is in the second half of May, that's actually still 6 weeks away.
Okay.
So definitely encourage you to your curator friend to apply.
Thank you.
Sure.
We're looking forward to your application. Jasmine, you are up next with your question, and Deedle, you are on deck.
Hi. Nice to speak to you guys and see you guys. I'm sorry I'm off camera right now. I look like a starving artist, so I'm not turning on this camera. But I had a question about if there was a workshop that there was still going to be a charge for attendees. Does that affect the approval of the application?
Yeah, that's a good question. From my understanding, it does not. Ricardo, is that
That is completely
accurate?
accurate, Jalen. Yep. We definitely consider it, and we will prioritize events that are free, but we don't exclude if there needs to be a ticket price or anything. There's actually a part of the application that also asks that. Are you charging a fee? And if so, just to let us know how much that fee is.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry, you had mentioned about the schools. It can't be during school hours. And what was the other point you mentioned?
It can't be during school hours. And if the writer is that, the school is bringing in is an
Okay, they can't be
employee.
employed, right,
Yeah,
or on the board. Okay, gotcha.
exactly. Mhm.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for
Thank you,
coming.
Jasmine.
Yes, this is great.
Jalen, after Didali's question, maybe we can pivot to the chat because I do know that there were a couple coming in. Does that sound good?
Yes, that sounds
All right.
great. Didal, please share.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Didal. I'm with New York Writers Workshop. And so we run writing workshops at a public library system here in New York. Sometimes they have funding for us to run the workshops, but then sometimes some of their branches reach out to us when they don't have that budget. And I'm just wondering if I can then apply for funding to be able to run a workshop at those branches, or is that something that public library has to do? I was just wondering, and I have another question after this, but I was wondering if you could speak to that. And by the way, it's free to the public. Yeah, our workshops.
Ricardo, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, honestly, both of those, to me, there are two organizations there. There's, of course, the New York Writers Workshop, and then also the branch or branches. Libraries are welcome to apply to us. And sort of an allusion to another comment here, we do get the feedback sometimes that there's not often bandwidth. I think especially we all know libraries continue to be underfunded and unsupported by our legislative bodies. And so that's definitely some of the feedback. There's just no bandwidth. If the bandwidth is there for the New York Writers Workshop to submit the applications and list the libraries as the event venue, that is A-okay.
Oh, okay.
It's actually probably really wonderful because in that case, the library will sort of see, right? If an application is approved, it's like, oh, we can also go to Poets and Writers for grants. So I think both of those are fine. And also congrats for offering those free workshops. I hope that you will consider applying to us because we'd love to fund more workshops. Yes.
Oh, yay. Yeah. Thanks. And I just have one more question. It might have been answered partially. So we also do offer fee-based workshops. In other words, workshops that you have to pay for. And sometimes, people will come to us and say, hey, do you have scholarships? So what happens in that instance? Like, does that person have to apply to you, but sort of like connected to us, or should we apply on behalf of that person or apply for scholarships in advance and offer that? But then again, I don't think, you need actual names, right?
Yeah. So actually this is, sorry, Jalen, I'm just going to follow up here, but I do think that just a clarification. So there are grants, there are checks that are made payable to the writer that is facilitating the workshop. So in this instance, when you say that there's scholarships, I'm assuming that those are scholarships for the attendees of the workshop.
Yeah.
So likely you wouldn't be applying for those writers. Instead, you'd be applying for a payment for the workshop facilitator. So if that makes sense. And I think in terms of, the impact of the grant, once approved, I believe then, maybe the organization, whether it be your organization or other organization, once they have a grant and they sort of understand, okay, the payment for the facilitator is covered, they then have an opportunity to sort of relook at their budget and allocate as they see fit. So I say that because I have known that, other organizations have applied to us, they get the grant, and then it frees up their money to, either put more resources into marketing or offer more scholarships. Deedle, if you'd like to, again, this is an open offer. We're happy to brainstorm. We're happy to talk to folks and sort of figure out what's eligible, what's not, and just offer experience of what we've seen also done through the program. But yeah, maybe the fine takeaway there is grants are made to the writers. They're not made to the organizations.
So, but they cannot, because I saw something earlier that said, if you want to apply, you have to be part of the organization. But then if this person is saying, well, I just want to apply so that I can pay the, I can pay the workshop. They're not part of an organization. They just want to take a workshop. I guess that's my question. Or can they not apply at all?
Students and attendees to workshops can apply. Again,
okay.
the grant in this case goes to the writer that's the organization is bringing in.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be happy to reach out, and then maybe I actually am a little curious to hear a little bit more about those workshops. So I'd be happy to reach out afterwards. But I am, I'm sorry. But I again, just for other folks, a clarification there that the grants do go to the writers, even though the organization is the one submitting the application, they're made payable to the writer only. But thank you, Deedle. And again, I'll follow up with you offline to understand a bit better. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo and Jalen. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Deedle. So yes, turning our attention to the chat, I think one of our earlier questions is from Ina Ko, asking, what if I am not in an organization, but an individual who wants to invite a writer for a group of people who want to take a writing workshop? Am I allowed to apply for a grant? I think that we only support organizations. Is that correct?
You're right there. Yep. And then what I'll say is that for when we say organization, it's a very expansive definition. So Ina, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. I think that just as an example, for instance, so we've had online reading series or poetry reading series where it's really a curator's sort of passion to bring a series to life. And so in that instance, maybe they're not a formal entity, there's no nonprofit status or anything like that, but they've come to a point where they have a plan, a marketing plan, they've put all the details for the event together. And then when they come to the grant system, they register as an organization, and then there's different kinds of organization types. So let me see if I can pull them up. Reading series is one of them. Writers group is another. We have options for an organization that's a cafe, a bookstore. It's really expansive. I think if you're not able to sort of find what organization type meets what your plan or event will be, reach out to us so that we can better assist and maybe figure out what kind of organization would better describe your project. And then likewise, so we could better understand what kind of workshop and event you're doing. So so that we can give you good advice about the eligibility. But the short answer is you are definitely allowed to apply for a grant, even if you're not a formal entity, right? It's a very expansive definition of organization. There's something my mom likes to say, which is like a lot of times you already have the no from people, and now what you're trying to figure out is the yes. Like what does the yes look like? So we're here to give you yeses as best and as often as we can. But it really does, talk to us, help us figure out how we can help your organization, your writers, your passion come to life.
Awesome. Another great question from Susan Kamninos is, a number of potential host institutions feel that it's too time-consuming or too intimidating for them to file a grant application for a writer. They want to know how they will benefit from filing an application. What can I tell them?
Yeah, I mean, there's There's honestly, that's the reality, I think, for a lot of folks. There's a lot of work and often not a lot of bandwidth. We're all, of course, people first and foremost. We do our best to work with folks. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we are very flexible when it comes to submitting an application. We're available for technical assistance. And I'll clarify, sometimes that means like I set up an appointment for like 30 minutes to walk someone through the system, right? Answer their questions, make sure they're understanding what they're doing, and feel confident doing it the first time so that they then can do it more times. That's sort of like the mindset that we're approaching it. The goal also for us is understanding that we want sort of fast applications. We're looking for a different grant system that would potentially make it easier for everyone. So not just the organizers, but also us whom are receiving the requests, and also the writers, so that writers have a little bit more agency. And it's not just the organization doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So we're working on it. It's a slow process. We recognize that. The other thing is, of course, just the appeal and the reminder that writers deserve to get paid for their contributions in the world. Sure, it may only take a pen and paper to do what we do, but it is much more valuable than that. And sometimes that's where I sort of begin the conversation, right? Writers are also artists who have bills to pay, who live in the real world with material needs. This is one way of meeting that and compensating them and supporting that. I hope that answers your question. I don't want to get into my soapbox, but I'm standing. So anyway, thank you, Susan, for coming. I owe you a phone call. I'm very sorry about that, but I will be in touch. And I'd love to also just offer a little bit more help and support if you're having a hard time sort of letting organizations know, like, or just convincing folks to apply. One more thing, actually, before I leave, the application is actually pretty straightforward. I hear this a lot from folks. It is tedious, I will say that and admit it, but it's pretty straightforward. I think a lot of times when people hear grants, they think of like thousands and thousands of words. We're not expecting thousands and thousands of words. And maybe I'll just leave it there. But thank you again, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Another question from Ina. Asking, when I fill out the information, do I have to have a clear schedule, duration, and date, perhaps of a reading or a workshop in hand?
Yeah, definitely. We ask for, so let's say if it's a one-time or a multiple series, just have the event, every single session that you're doing ready. We do ask for a start and end time. And the reason being that, you know, sometimes events are happening in the same day. So we just want to make sure that we understand, you know, when it comes time to review the request, we understand, okay, Jalen is doing a reading at 1 p.m. and then doing a workshop at 5 p.m. And that helps us. So yes, you do have to have that ready and in hand.
Great. Going down a little bit to a question from Nick Norwood. We're an organization based out of Georgia, but have a facility in Nyack where we would like to start a reading series. Are we eligible to apply for mini grants for the events in Nyack? That's a great question.
Great question. I sorry, Jay.
No, it's okay.
I've been talking a lot, so I'm like,
no, it's okay. This is a question that I definitely would like to know what you think about.
Yeah, so here is the short answer. Yes, your organization is definitely able to apply for their events in Nyack. When you say you're based in Georgia, if the organization is based in the metro area of Atlanta, the city of Atlanta, there's the potential that you might also be able to apply for events there. But I do think that would require like a one-on-one so that we can better understand that. But for the events in Nyack, yes, definitely are eligible to submit an application. We'd love to get more requests always.
Awesome.
Thank you for that question.
A question from Teresa. Do I need to have a website to apply for my poetry series?
No, you don't need to have a website to apply. A website definitely helps when it comes to publicizing those readings though. But you know, I've seen there's a broad range of like what marketing and publicity looks like. But no, you don't need to have a website. When organizations are registering, it's like a brief Q&A and a quick survey that sort of lets us know who you are, what you do, and how you do it. But no, there's no website requirement. No.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Now before I believe we'll soon be able to turn our attention to our raised hands again.
Okay.
But we have one last question in the chat so far from Claudia, mentioning the fact that the website states that the writer for awarded grants, they need to provide their social security number. Does this necessarily disqualify folks who do not have a social security number?
No, it does not disqualify. That's a great question. Thank you for that, Claudia. It does not disqualify folks. So as you may or may not know, grants are considered taxable income. The reason we ask for social security numbers is in the event that a writer receives funding from poets and writers, whether that be here in New York, California, or the other cities, if it's over 600, our finance department issues a 1099, but it's not a requirement. Actually, international writers, for instance, they're not required to submit an SSN because they reside overseas. Claudia, if there's like a specific case or instance that you'd like to discuss with us, we're happy to do that offline, but that's sort of like in a nutshell. It is part of the grant making sort of process here. It's taxable income. There's a reporting requirement for writers over 600, but there is not, yeah, I think it's more case by case at times.
That definitely does answer the question. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. Bill, you are up next to ask your question, and Scott, you are on deck following Bill.
Thanks. Thank you, both of you and all of you for helping us out. I have a rather complicated situation, which is going to take too much time to go into, and I would like to talk to someone personally. How can I do that?
Oh, excellent. So we are gonna drop our contact information in the chat. I don't know, Jalen, if you have that ready, but I'm pulling it up.
Okay.
Here we go. Okay. So we are available at this email address.
Should I be looking in the chat now?
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. I'm having a hard time copy pasting. Copy. Paste. There we go. So the program inbox is RW, stands for Readings Workshops, -east@pw.org. If you email there, both Jalen and I get a copy. You can also call us up if you'd like to have a phone call. Extension 226 is myself. Extension 300 is Jalen. I didn't know that until very recently, Jalen. But yes, you can. Happy to have a call. And
Could you repeat the email address again? Oh, there it is. Okay, rweast@pw.org.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it aloud again. rw-east@pw.org.
Great. Thanks a whole lot.
Sure thing,
No
Bill.
problem. We look forward to connecting with you to help
Likewise.
out. Scott, we'd love to hear your question, and Suzanne, you are on deck.
So I'm in the midst of planning for a meeting of 40 poets, all published, all active, but we want to have a live meeting gathering together. These are people that live outside of the city in the rest of the state, New York State. I would like to get grant money or be able to give them money to travel to, because the places are, well, you know, we have a very big state. And for some people it's more difficult than others to travel. How would I go about doing that? Can I do that through P&W, or it's 40 is a lot of people. I understand that.
Yeah.
And what would I do? Do I have to get a grant for each of those people?
Yes, so that's the short answer. You do have to submit an application for each of those writers. Like I mentioned earlier, though, we're here to try to figure out the technical aspects and to make the administrative work a little easier. I don't think this is, I'm happy to share this. So we actually were able to provide support to a gathering of the tribes a couple of years back for the Whitney Biennial show. So they had marathon readings going on, and that sounds about the same number of folks that applied there. So it's feasible. We just sort of need to work a little bit together on how to make the administrative work easier. Scott, I'm happy to reach out to you to see if we can set up some sort of time to do that. I would say that if the event is a little bit far off, that helps because, then we don't have
September.
Okay, so we're in perfect timing. Great. But yeah, 40 poets, that's wonderful. I am excited to hear a little bit more. Maybe we'll share some of those event details with some of the folks here once
I should
things have been
call you or
finalized.
send you an email.
Yes, exactly.
I'll do that.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Suzanne, please share your questions with us.
Hi, thanks. Now I think that maybe this question was answered, so forgive me.
No
So
problem.
I host a monthly free reading series, usually like 5 readers, and so I'm always trying to pay people, and of course it's free, so I can't, but sometimes once in a while I get a grant like this, and I'm wondering if I wanted to do a series of readings and pay my writers, would I apply for 3 because they're monthly, 3 consecutive readings, or would I need to apply 3 to 5 separate times?
I hear you. Yeah. If you have all of the writer details ready and available, you can definitely submit applications for events way in advance. Like right now, I think there's a couple of applications, Jalen, for like events in the fall of next year.
Definitely.
We're holding them. But it really depends on sort of how far in advance things have been planned out. That's one part of the answer. The other part is if a grant is approved and there's some sort of change, it is possible to edit that grant and basically to swap in a writer. That's happened before. So let's say I'm applying for my October reading, but that person just isn't able to make it anymore. And it just so happens I have a friend who can step in. If you reach out to us before the event takes place, obviously, ideally as much in advance as we can also work with you in that regard. But there is no getting around, you do have to apply for each writer. There's of course like the organizational cap that you sort of have to keep in mind, right? So like you have about $3,000 that your reading series could be eligible for. Some of the conversation is budgeting. So like how many writers would you like to apply for how much? But yes, you're definitely welcome to submit in advance. If something goes wrong or just something has to change, we can also work with you to adapt there. How wonderful though for your reading series. Exquisites, so this is a reading series here in New York and Brooklyn, but Exquisites has a similar sort of model. They bring in 4 writers each month, and they just have organized themselves where they submit applications on a rolling basis. So, they apply for 4 writers each time, and that's sort of how they go along. Other reading series, they submit the whole year request, and, they let us know, here's what we'd like to do. Yeah.
I get that organized, I'd be like the mayor. Thank you so much for organizing this.
This meeting. Yeah, of course. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Heading back to the chat, it looks like we have a question from Barbara Clark asking, would it be realistic to partner with other organizations and have a writer traveling through our rural area and have each location sponsored by a different organization? Would it be allowed to have multiple mini grants for one artist touring? It is hard to get professional writers from out of the area without giving more compensation. Could a coordinated effort hurt or help?
I mean, my sense is that a coordinated effort can only help, right? We've talked about this we've talked about one of the ideas that we'd really like to put together. This is like from the drawing board, so this is just me sharing what I would love to see. But touring grants for writers whom are giving readings in New York, that would be incredible. The way that the app program guidelines and are set up right now, it's not possible to do that. So actually a coordinated effort among organizations is kind of needed. But again, because we recognize that that's admin work, that's bandwidth, we are available, to try to help folks who maybe want to do something like that. Reach out. I'm going to put our contact info again.
Yeah, and I'll also just add, we don't have a problem with funding, the same writer for multiple different things. Again, many of our grants are writer initiated, as much as there are ones where program directors are reaching out to us to fund their writers. A lot of writers consistently know that they can come to us regardless of what organization they're currently working with. So that would not be a problem. Let's see. Another question from Teresa. What about if I want to do an anthology for my poetry series, word of mouth poetry series? Is that possible to apply for funding?
So unfortunately, we're not able to provide funds for other aspects of an event. So, marketing, printing costs for an anthology, that does fall outside of the guidelines and the purview of the program. So I'm sorry, Teresa. Yeah. Yeah, but definitely if the reading series fully that qualifies, and likewise if there's some sort of writing workshop component, we definitely be able to fund that. But anything outside of that, it wouldn't be eligible for funds.
All right. Well, thank you for answering the question.
But yeah,
it's a great question.
It is, yeah. Thanks.
I'm not sure if I'm missing any questions in the chat or anybody else would like to. Elena, you have a hand up.
You're muted.
Yes, she says she knows.
Thank you, because I'm such a techno whiz. Okay, I did put this in the chat, but again, because I am such a techno whiz, I've gotten a little skewed. I don't know how the cities are decided, but the question I asked was, why not Newark? If that makes any sense. I mean, I said this might be a bit off base, but. So that was my question. I mean, it's a great and diverse place right across the river. So if you've got Detroit and you've got Atlanta and you've got wherever else, you might just.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us, Elena.
Thank you.
So right now, our major funders are really state organizations. So in this case, we're funded largely in part through the New York State Council of the Arts and New York City's Department of Cultural Affairs. So when it comes to events and organizations in New York, it's restricted in that regard, right? So the organizations must be in New York. The writers don't necessarily have to be from New York, but the organizations and the events, they need to serve a New York audience. As for why those 8 cities that we fund in the East and the West, they were really decided, I think a couple of years back, had a lot to do with the activities and sort of the sense of literary communities that were in those cities. We'd love to expand to more cities, right? That's sort of what is always on the back of our places. Like, when are we going to do Florida? When are we going to do, I don't know, Boulder? Boulder's been a big one. We get a lot of requests for that, but it really is just down to, as many other things, to the resources and the funds that are available.
Right. I mean, but if you bring up, I'm sorry, I was going to say, if you bring up a literary community, well, again, then I'm not pushing because it's not mine to push. But again,
I'd love those pushes because it helps us. It helps us make a case, right? This is why we need to select a new city, or why we need to continue to raise funds for funding in this sort of event. Yeah, we'd love to. We'd love to be able to do stuff everywhere. But I would say, Elena, I'd love to have an email or something where if you'd like to send a note of support, that would be a-okay and something we could definitely, use to continue to make a case. We need to expand the funding regions. It helps us. So yeah, please feel free to send me a note.
Okay, and also when I came on here, I didn't come on initially or sign up or register initially thinking about that. That arose as this was going on. But I really also thank both of you. Good to meet you, Jaden.
Nice to meet you too.
Because I will be applying through places and so on.
Excellent.
So I thank you both so much for all your hard work. And I know it's really hard work.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks,
you. Elena.
Thank you.
Jalen, I'm looking at time, and I think we probably will want to wrap up a little bit sooner, but Elena's point made me look at the Q&A. There's a couple in here that I think we weren't able to answer. So I'm gonna open up the window and then just maybe read out the questions, and just so that we can sort of close. Yeah. All right. So Ellen had asked, hi, I teach creative writing workshops as an individual teacher. Is this program just for readings, or could I apply? Ellen, if the workshops are being hosted or sponsored by a community partner, the community partner is definitely able to apply. I'm sorry if we were very heavy on the reading series. I think I'm a poet, so I'm always like, poetry reading, that's sort of like my hand tips, but definitely creative writing workshops are absolutely a-okay. The workshop genres that we serve, and also for readings, poetry, fiction, or creative nonfiction, memoir, personal essay writing, those would be fine. So if you're teaching in those genres, there's a community partner, definitely eligible to apply. Bill had mentioned this question, I think was going to be for offline. So I'm going to leave that there. Yeah, I'm going to leave those there. Ina, I'm sorry. What if I'm not an organization, but an individual who wants to invite a writer for, oh, we did answer this one. Okay. DeFay Anderson. There are 7 poets in my writers group. Is the payment per poet? Oh, this is a great question. So just to reiterate, the grants are meant to, they're requesting payments for a writer who's coming in to facilitate a workshop. We're not able to pay the members of a writing group for attending their group. It just falls outside of the guidelines and the program scope. But definitely, DeFay, if let's say you're interested in bringing, I don't know, I'd love to bring my favorite author in, and I've managed to get their email contact, and I'm talking to them, and I'm like to say, hey, I'd really love for you to come and like read a little bit of your book to my group. That would be an eligible case, right? Because then that author would be the recipient of the grant. Your writing group would essentially be the sponsoring organization. And that's actually one of the organization types we fund, writers groups. One of my favorite is Palace Poetry Group. They're upstate, but that's essentially what they do. They invite outside poets in to meet with their group, and it's really wonderful. But I hope that answers your question, or at least clarifies things a little bit more.
Actually, can I jump in there, Ricardo?
Yeah, sure.
This is my question. We do a lot of things online. If I can get an organization to sponsor all 7 of us performing online, is the fee cut off at $450 for the entire performance, or is that per poet?
It's per poet. I understand now. Yeah, thank you for coming online. Yeah, it's per poet. Definitely, if there's an organization willing to submit those applications, I would encourage that. Yeah. Again, just a reminder that there is an eligibility check, but you just really need to have a publication or featured performance credit in the genre you're presenting in. But that's great. I love that. Please feel free to reach out to us if you need a little bit of assistance doing that. But that's great. I'm really happy.
Thank you. And I probably will. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I think this is the last one. Barbara Clark asks, would it be realistic to partner with another organization? Oh, wait, this is the one we talked about, right? And the idea of touring grants. Could a coordinated effort hurt or help? Definitely helps. It helps us all. We are in it together.
Can I throw in one question?
Sure.
Can an already established writing workshop sponsor the leader of that writing workshop?
I think the question will be whom, if the writers group is basically applying for the facilitator, I would say yes. I may be another one of those case-to-case basis. I just want to hear a little bit more. But yeah, if a writers group has a teacher they're happy with, they want to bring them in and request funding for that teacher, yes, that's A-okay.
I'll be talking to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Looking forward to it,
Thank
Bill.
you too, Jalen.
Of course.
Well, I think we are at time here. Thank you to the 22 of you who stuck it through with us. I appreciate your patience. Again, with the technical glitch in the beginning. Jalen, earlier in the meeting, had shared a couple of links to other resources. I'm just going to go through them just very quickly. We will be sending a recap email, so it'll have the chat, the links that we've dropped in, and then also a link to the recording from tonight. But in terms of other resources and programs, we have 2 new initiatives, fairly new. They are Mapping the Maze, which is a new series of online workshops designed to demystify the publishing process. There's actually a session coming up in April 11th. Registration is still open for that. It's a wonderful seminar. Well, I won't say seminar, it is a workshop, but there are sort of seminars and talks and really a sort of like almost like a crash course on that sounds crude, but I mean that in the best way, a crash course on sort of like getting your bearings on what it is, how do I publish something? And it really is a guidepost for people to set up a plan for what their steps are to getting, their work out, whether that be a book, whether that be applying to journals, just, perfecting a query letter. The session in April is focused on fiction writers, but again, registration is still open. So we're gonna drop the link to that. The other is another new initiative. It's called Get the Word Out. It is a new publicity incubator for debut authors. Actually, I think one of our authors was joining us a little earlier, Federico. It's a publicity incubator. Again, it's really designed to uplift and support debut authors, and it gets them in touch under a lead mentor. And again, they get the opportunity to think about how to make the biggest impact and splash for their debut. In addition to that, Poets and Writers Group, it is basically a social media online platform. It's free to use. It is relatively new. But again, it's a great resource to connect to other writers online. I can't undersell or stress enough, it is free. And I think that given all of the ways that our attention and time is used to sell stuff, I feel like I should advocate for free stuff. So please make use of Poets and Writers Groups. Also, our literary events calendar, it's free, gain national exposure for your events. All you really need is a pw.org account, but the calendar rotates and updates on a daily basis. So you submit your event, there's a chance it'll be on pw.org, the main page. So definitely make use of that. Definitely another great resource is the Directory of Writers. So much like it sounds, it's an online directory. It's not something that we directly administer, but oftentimes we do know that organizers use the directory to sort of think about writers that they'd like to invite for a reading series potentially, or a workshop. It's great. I encourage it. If you'd like to fill in an application, you do have to apply to it, but it's a great resource. Again, it's free. And then just very quickly, a couple of databases. So we do have the Literary Magazines database, the Small Presses database, and the Grants and Awards listing. Basically, almost like a Swiss Army knife of what a writer would need to do to get their work out. Make use of it. The listings are updated by our colleagues in the editorial department. They vet them, so they're safe and they're reliable for writers. And then, of course, last but not least, our YouTube channel. It is our archive basically of these community meetings that we've been able to do online, as well as other events. So if you take a look, you'll see stuff from the gala, you'll see stuff from Get the Word Out, and Mapping the Maze is not on there, but you will see other stuff. Okay, I think this is my goodbye, my closing. Jalen, if you'd like to say anything, I give you the mic.
Thanks. I just echo everything Ricardo's saying. It was great to see all of you. It's always wonderful to put faces to names and just see what the faces and what the energy looks like on the East. So thank you all for continuing to contribute to your literary communities and allow us to help in that effort.
All right. Thank you all. I'm going to save the meeting chat here. If I've made, we were talking, I mentioned to please reach out, please do follow up. We'd love to help you. We'd love to brainstorm with you. We'd love to help. That's what we're here for. We're in service of writers. So make use of it, make use of us. And again, like Jalen said, thank you all for joining us and for your time and patience. And we will see you at the next meeting. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.